So this is day 2 of my Poetry in Lockdown project, where I aim to read a different poet and post a video on YouTube every day. I will be putting the text of the poem, where the poet is out of copyright, in the comments below the video. So if you want to have a look at how the poem is laid out on the page, you can have a look at those. So today I'm going to read from Christina Rossetti, a mid-19th century Victorian poet. And Rossetti's poetry often draws attention to the flora and fauna of everyday life. So she's not a poet who writes about grand mountain scenery or sublime vistas. Her poems instead tend to be full of snails and beetles, robins and thrushes, daisies and meadowgrass. And she's also not a poet who anthropomorphizes. And one of the things I like about her poetry is that she respects the alterity of these other small creatures and acknowledges that they have their own existence, which is oblivious to human need and desire. And that partly comes from her Christian beliefs, which she interprets to mean that everything in the known world is part of God's creation. And I'm going to read a poem today called The Dumb Friend, which is about the poet's relationship with a tree that she's planted. I planted a young tree when I was young, but now the tree is grown and I am old. There wintry robin shelters from the cold and tunes his silver tongue. A green and living tree I planted it, a glossy-foliaged tree of evergreen. All through the noontide heat it spread a screen whereunder I might sit. But now I only watch it where it towers. I, sitting at my window, watch it tossed by rattling gale or silvered by the frost, or when sweet summer flowers, wagging its round green head with stately grace, in tender winds that kiss it and go by. It shows a green full age, and what show I? A faded, wrinkled face. So often have I watched it, till mine eyes have filled with tears, and I have ceased to see, that now it seems a very friend to me in all my secrets wise, a faithful, pleasant friend who, year by year, grew with my growth and strengthened with my strength, but whose green lifetime shows a longer length. When I shall not sit here, it will still bud in spring and shed rare leaves in autumn, and in summer heat give shade and warmth in winter, when my bed is made in shade the cypress leaves. So the poem both celebrates what she sees as a friendship with the tree, but at the same time, it's a melancholic reflection on the poet's own ageing towards death as the tree's vigour overtakes her. So although she seems to take pleasure from the fact that the tree grew with my growth and strengthened with my strength, ultimately the tree's green lifetime shows a longer length. And while the poem stages her gratitude for the tree's companionship and the variety of ways it comforts her at different stages in her life, it also indirectly reveals some of her struggles. And I want to think about the rhyme scheme that Rossetti chooses, where the first and the fourth line rhyme and the second and the third rhyme as a pair. And I think that particular rhyme scheme creates a dynamic of containment. And so if we look at the first stanza, old and cold are the paired rhymes in the middle. They're both in unpleasant conditions in the dynamic of the poem, but they're sheltered by the outer rhymes of young and tongue of the robin. So we see the shade and the protectiveness of the tree is actually enacted by the rhyme. But at the same time that the poem celebrates the tree, it's also concerned with her own fading into a constrained old age. And to me, there's an underlying anger and envy to the poem that isn't immediately apparent. And that's something I find really fascinating in Rossetti's poems, that she appeases the conventions of decorum expected of a woman poet, but there's so often a sharp edge to her poems, lurking notes of malice bitterness, and even rage. And many of her poems engage with assumptions about female beauty and about the fear of being ugly or unappealing, and what that might mean in terms of value within a patriarchal culture. And there are a number of unanswered questions in the poem. So why does she have to sit inside the window? And why does it matter that her face is faded and wrinkled? What are the secrets that she has that the tree knows? And why do her eyes fill with tears? So these questions, I think, really open up other possible readings for the poem. And I think we can trace in the repeated use of the word but, the way that the poet is grappling with her own disappointment and the constricted life that she's had to live. So she tells us, "A green and living tree, I planted it, but now I only watch it where it towers." And it seems to me to be a but that repeatedly shows a kind of resentment that that her life has had to be this way, that she can only watch it, that she's placed in this passive condition. So I think the poem does touch on that anger, and I think that image of a kind of a middle class woman having to be constrained, being separated from this kind of life of growth and fertility. But although the poem expresses this disappointment and resentment, it also seems to offer a peaceful resolution in the final stanza, and we can see that the conjunction turns from but to when. So the tree and the woman will no longer be at odds, as she imagines herself buried under the tree and becomes part of its seasonal cycle. And we have internal rhyme here in the final stanza. So we have the shade and made amplified by a second use of shade in the last line. And I think that also heightens its double meaning, both of the shelter that the tree provides, but also the words associating with the shades or the shadows of death. So her own shade is contained by the outer rhyming words of leaves and weaves. So she is finally reunited with the tree, and that's enacted by the rhyme. So in death, the struggles of her life will cease. But the poem remains with the question, is death the only possibility of peace and happiness for a woman who rebels?